Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Top Reasons Teams Fail in Test Automation. Before we begin, I'd like to cover 3 housekeeping items for our viewers. First, at the bottom of your audience console, you'll find a number of widgets for questions and additional resources. When you have questions for the presenter during the webcast, click on the Q&A widget and submit your question. We will answer as many questions as possible at the end of the webcast, and if we run out of time, we'll get back to you via email. Second, if you need any tech support during the webinar, please use the help option. Third and finally, a copy of today's slide deck is available in the resources section at the bottom of your screen. We will also email you a link to the recording of this webinar within the next few hours. With that, I'll introduce our presenter for today's broadcast, Eran Kinsbruner, Chief Evangelist here at Perfecto by Perforce. Eran, thanks for joining us on today's broadcast.
Sure, thank you, Shelby. And I'm super excited specifically about this webinar because, we are just kicking 2020, and that's the first, I think, of a kind state of the test automation report or survey that Perfecto with Perforce conducted. And I think we found some disturbing insights or findings, but also it gives us an opportunity as we start also a new decade to look and dive into these issues and see how teams, both testers and developers, can address these issues and move forward with a higher degree of test automation coverage. So as Shelby introduced me, I'm the Chief Evangelist and author at Perfecto by Perforce, blogger, speaker, actually nearly 20 years already in this domain of software development and testing. You can follow me if you're not doing so on Twitter or LinkedIn, and continue the conversation also after the webinar if you have any more thoughts or questions about the content, about the survey, or about anything related to testing mobile and web applications. So today's agenda is going to be focused mostly around why test automation still is a huge challenge or a bottleneck in DevOps, and how can we overcome it, focusing on some, again, of the insights and findings of the recent report that Perfecto conducted. This is the report, the survey. It was just launched a week ago, sorry, and it's called The State of Test Automation. This is the link that you can actually download it. It's a free download report. I'm going to touch some of the findings here. I'm talking about continuous testing and the need for scale, but you cannot scale without a very reliable and solid test automation. So I will kind of connect the dots between scalable and stable test automation for a higher degree of maturity also in DevOps. And as Shelby mentioned, feel free during the webinar and also after to ask any questions. So before I dive into the report, again, as a reminder to all of you guys online, what is continuous testing? Everyone is using it. I'm using it a lot. So again, just to set the stage here, and then we can, when I'm continuously using it during the webinar, it will be clear to everyone what I mean. So continuous testing is not just test automation. Test automation obviously enables continuous testing, but continuous testing takes test automation and extracts, if you like, the high-value test cases from the test automation suite to focus and identify high business risk associated with any code change, pull request that you might have in your build, in your software iteration. So it's very agile, it's very specific to finding and delivering fast feedback to identify business risks in your business across web, mobile, or any other applications that you might have. Again, test automation enables continuous testing. It's much more than just test automation. In addition, when you do continuous testing and when you're doing it right, you want to scale it from several reasons, okay? The need for test automation at scale relies on or depends on fast feedback, from any changes that might have happened. Scaling also involves high degree or high coverage of platforms, both mobile and web. Today, there is no really distinction between mobile platforms or web. Everything is being consumed across these different platforms. So scaling of test automation obviously needs to work across higher and also increasingly number of platforms. All of this needs to happen as soon as possible to mitigate risks, to allow time to release on time, and respond to market changes and defects sometimes coming from production. Hopefully, you find them earlier. When we are talking about continuous testing and also test automation, again, for those of you who are following me, you know that I'm classifying test automation into the 3 different personas that are involved in test automation. And these are the 3 personas: the business testers, who are mostly doing exploratory and manual testing; the SDETs, which are the software developers in testing, the test automation engineers; and sometimes, or hopefully many times, also the developers that are taking part in assuring quality, supporting the test automation engineers. While it's not mentioned here, the developers have multiple roles in quality. It's not just about writing the code and doing some unit testing and build acceptance testing. They are also responsible in enabling test automation engineers to be successful in their testing, designing their features and code for testability, trusting from reliability of the test cases that automation engineers are developing, giving them the trust and confidence that they are doing something right, and if not, correcting and helping them. It's all kind of a teamwork here. It's not just one individual working in a different silo. And I'm mentioning it because in this report that I mentioned earlier, we actually found that individuals or testing teams are separated from the development or from the feature teams, resulting in some, I would say, negative consequences, and I'm going to touch on that pretty soon. So let's dive into the survey, the findings, and see what it means and how we can overcome, with practical, real-life examples that we see, that we recommend at Perfecto to you guys. So the majority of testing, this is one of the findings, the majority of testing is done by separate teams causing late feedback. You can see here that almost 47% of the people that responded to the survey, and by the way, the survey was conducted through high-level managers, QA managers, director of quality, VPs of quality and DevOps. So we're talking to senior-level managers trying to find, the root causes, the pains in software testing, in test automation. And what we have learned, again, almost 50% of the testing is being done in a separate silo, in a separate team outside of the development, okay? Only, I would say 90% resides within feature teams or squads. So what does it mean? Why is that important? So the implications of QA testing, depending on, it doesn't really matter which persona we are referring to. When it's outside of the development, the implications are as follows. We're looking at escape defects and late feedback. And why is that? Because the QA guys are sitting and waiting for something to be delivered to them. They are not up to date with latest changes that are happening inside the cycle, inside the sprint, or whatever agile methodology which is being implemented. Therefore, they are also doing a lot of manual testing because they only, wait for 2/3 of the sprint to get access to a build. They then need to assess what was the scope of this build, need to start writing test automation. Usually, they don't get it in time for the release, and this leaves, no other choice of doing a lot of manual testing, and this is the root cause of escape defects and late feedback back to the developers. The misalignment is obviously clear, and I mentioned it earlier. Changes happened on both sides, by the way, testing and development, and they are not in sync, they are not seeing or talking on the same, same level. So what are some of the recommendations? You can start with one or two. You don't need to implement all of these, but the recommendation is to break these silos, break these bridges between QA and dev. This is, I would say, late 2000 year state of the market. We are now entering a new decade. We have more mature developers and testers. We have more mature practices in Agile and DevOps. There is no more need to have this separation between dev and test. You need to start considering, if you're not doing so, building a mixed team, which includes both developers, test automation engineers, and business testers. The three personas that I mentioned earlier needs to sit within the same team, focusing on the same software iteration. You need to align the feature teams on software iteration scope in advance. These guys, the testing teams, if they are still sitting outside of the development teams, they cannot learn afterwards on what was implemented within the sprint, what bug fixes entered the sprint, what kind of features were touched or implemented from scratch. They need to be aligned in advance. They need to have visibility at least into the next 2 or 3 software iteration scope, so they can plan ahead, they can develop in time their test automation, maybe build in advance sophisticated test environments that are required due to the latest advancements in your product. You need to give them more time. Time is definitely one of the root causes that we are lacking test automation and providing fast feedback back to the developers. You need to plan the test automation coverage and strategy across the team. So if you looked at the previous slides with the 3 personas, you have multiple personas that are doing testing today. You need to distribute the test automation coverage, platforms, test automation scenarios, and any other things that is related to quality. By the way, it's not just functional testing, it's also non-functional testing, performance, security, accessibility. You need to distribute this, maybe not equally. The developers have their own priority, but especially between the assets and the business testers, you need to have a more reasonable distribution of test automation coverage, so everything makes more sense, and you are able to identify specific issues, obviously, earlier in the cycle. To do so, you need to match technologies with individual skill sets, okay? Business testers, who are mostly doing exploratory and manual testers, cannot write robust, reliable scripts in Selenium or Appium. They don't have enough good coding skill sets. You need to match some codeless, BDD, TDD, whatever frameworks that you can think of to enable these business testers to also participate. Also, for the test automation engineers, you need to enable them on Selenium, Appium, or other frameworks that matches their development skill set and also the test coverage responsibilities. So this is one, both insight, root cause of pain in test automation, but also some very practical, easy to implement recommendation that we see successful teams taking in order to achieve better test automation visibility, coverage, and success. The next finding, which wasn't a surprise, but it's still a disturbing finding, is that test automation is, one of the biggest bottlenecks with Agile DevOps. The executives that we interviewed and surveyed told us, the test automation rates in our organization is below 50%, okay? I don't need to, it's not my invention, but you need to understand that over 70 or 80% test automation rates, this is the enabler for continuous testing and for DevOps, continuous deployment of software. Below 50% simply does not allow you to release in the velocity that these managers that we spoke with are aiming. Management today are looking at continuous delivery, continuous deployment, sometimes daily, sometimes multiple times a day. In worst scenarios, maybe on a weekly basis. when you have below 50% test automation coverage, it leaves you 50% of the other scope done manually, meaning you are releasing in a matter of weeks rather than hours or days. So again, test automation is still a bottleneck. This is the reality today, and things need to change. Again, we're seeing this same report also on the World Quality Report, the state of DevOps in DORA that was released last year, and we found the same, this exact same insight also, as we began 2020. So obviously the implication is innovation is low. If you are curious to see what I mean by innovation is low, go to almost any enterprise application that is in the App Store today, regardless of the stars that it gets. Look at the previous or the last 4 or 5 releases that the app made on the mobile in the App Store or the Google Play. You will see that the content, minor bug fixes and performance improvements. That's the common scope for most mobile native applications that I'm looking at the App Store. And the reason is that they don't have enough time to innovate when a cycle takes so long. They have escape defects to production. They can only automate about 50% of what they're aiming. So they're simply not adding more risks by innovating and adding more functionality while the existing one isn't fully automated. So innovation is slow. Sometimes it doesn't even exist. When you have a low degree of test automation, obviously the manual activities are taking most of your time here. And when the manual activities takes time, you're getting low or late feedback, low quality, and the developers are, struggling to find defects on code that they implemented, ages ago. So this is definitely a costly and painful thing that we found out. And I think there is no one good way to resolve this reality. Believe me, a lot of organizations are trying to do so, but to do it, you need to have a strategy. You need to have in place, as mentioned on the right hand here, you need to have a solid path to continuous testing that is built on a stable foundation, stable test automation. You need to build things from the ground up in a very diligent way, in a very solid way, building test automation that matches, again, the coverage objectives, the skill set, the tool stack, and so forth, and allows you to visualize and get visibility into what's going on. Only then you scale up both the testing, the platforms, and improve velocity and time to market. When you are rushing things, you are trying to put too many things in an unstable foundation without good practices, both coding practices and test automation practices. And I'm intentionally separating test automation practices and coding practices, because coding practices are developing clean code, documented code, matching Java coding principles or other languages principles. When you are developing test automation using code, of course, you need to have a different layer of discipline, which means you are identifying the right element locators. You are taking into account, interrupts like pop-ups, security alerts, environment availability, stuff like that. When you combine both coding principles together with test automation practices, you are building a much more stable automation foundation on top of which you can grow and improve. And, the platforms that we are testing against today, the mobile and web, aren't helpful. Okay, they are sometimes the root cause of the flakiness and the low level of automation. You need to have a good lab in front of you or a good test environment in front of you. Otherwise, everything that you are investing in from a test automation perspective will collapse when you are scaling it up. So it's a mix of things here that you need to carry and build, with mindful approach. And again, you need to strategize about it. It's not just, I'm doing testing. It's much bigger than that. And we see it is a market problem that most of the executives that we interviewed mentioned. Continuous delivery is not happening across the market. I think that's an easy one. It's obviously an outcome of the previous finding. If 14% of the enterprises and the organizations that we spoke with are able to release daily, leaving 85% doing it weekly, monthly, or quarterly, obviously CI/CD is not something that they are successful in, and it relates to, of course, test automation, fast feedback, quality visibility within the pipeline, and other practices that some of them I mentioned earlier. But obviously, the market today from a DevOps continuous deployment perspective is not mature as we would have expected. Again, 40% only are able to release daily. So again, you will see similar implications as I mentioned earlier in the previous slide. So when you are releasing slow, you are not catching up with the competition, you are innovating slower, you have longer cycles, which cost you money because, as you spend more hours per software iteration, you are spending resources, you are paying to individuals to do manual testing instead of automation. So obviously it costs you much longer, and you are also finding feedback from both internal resources and also, unfortunately, from external resources quite late in the cycle, which causes everything to be a mess. So the recommendation, and there is an overlap in the recommendation like in the previous slides, it all connects to a good strategy around software development and testing. So from a recommendation perspective, obviously, and we also found that most of the organizations that we spoke with are planning to allocate more budgets in investing in test automation and test automation tools. So test automation as the main barrier to your continuous delivery process needs to be a high priority for the organization, because obviously it's not working as it should have today. You need to invest much more in order to make it work. B, you need to also analyze your processes and automate as much as possible your manual efforts. It's not just about the testing, by the way. If the previous slide was showing that you have 14% organization only able to release daily, automation is an enabler for CI/CD, but it's not the only thing that you automate within the pipeline. As you can see here, there are a lot of things that are done. So think about any manual gate point phase that you have in the pipeline that is done manually, or it's pending an approval by someone. It means that you are not automating it. It means it's another slow process for you or a barrier to releasing daily. So think about whatever you automate today and whatever you're not automating today mostly, and see how you can automate the process. It can be done through algorithms with AI machine learning, like automated code reviews. It can be done by static code analysis tools, security vulnerabilities, scanning that are done automatically, deployment to pre-production and production environments that are done automatically without any gatekeepers. Again, everything needs to be done with quality metrics and measurements and visibility. But at the end of the day, as long as you are keeping too many manual barriers within the process, you will always be behind on the maturity towards continuous deployment. So automation, automation, automation. Lastly, you need to have, again, I mentioned it earlier, a unified teams. You can no longer have these barriers. DevOps is all about, when people are starting to even include more terms into this DevOps, like breaking DevOps into DevSecOps, DevTestOps, DevAPMOps. It's all about a team releasing value to the market much faster with full alignment towards the same goal. When you have an outsider team like security, performance and monitoring, ops, QA, everything, is becoming more slow, inefficient. A lot of late feedback is coming to the pipeline. So again, you need to unify the dev, test, ops, security. Whoever is contributing to your product needs to sit together for maximum alignment and maximum visibility. Automating all testing activities is easier said than done. Yeah, Obviously the manual testing is one of the most painful thing. Obviously, we also mentioned it in the previous slide, but look at the other findings that the survey, identified. And the number two item that the responders pointed out as a time-consuming thing is the test environment setup and also the script creation and maintenance. So these kind of two additional components or artifacts within the process that are done manually because it's very hard to automate also slows down the entire maturity in test automation and DevOps. So obviously the implications are still here and they are the same, but you need to start again with a strategic test automation foundation, but also look at how you are scaling and setting up your test environment. Either consider leveraging service virtualizations or environments as a service. We recently spoke with Quali. Quali is an enterprise as a service provider that enables you to blueprint your entire environments that you need for DevOps, not just testing. And they enable teams to simply reduce or actually eliminate the bottleneck from setting up containers and environments and whatever complex databases or other services that you are relying on throughout your process. So think about automating the testing environment. Perfecto as a cloud solution, we are already removing the barrier from our clients to set up and maintain their mobile and desktop web environments by us virtualizing everything for them. We are providing access to 11 different data centers to real devices, real desktop browsers, whatever Chrome, Firefox, Edge, and Safari on any different configuration is being provided to you as a Selenium grid in the cloud alongside smartphones and tablets. Okay, think about how much time this saves organizations who are, doing it today in-house or manually or paying someone else to do it. Obviously, the efficiency is much more greater when you are doing it through a cloud solution. So cloud platforms, service virtualization are enablers to reduce the automation of test environments or actually the manual activities that are involved in setting up these test environments. Do more within the CI without risking. The CI needs to be green at all times with build acceptance testing, deployments, anything that you can think of adding in the CI needs to be fully thought after and be very, very careful with what you're doing. But you need to merge slowly more and more things into the CI to drive better feedback faster and fix faster as well. This MTTR, MTTM, the mean time to resolution and finding issues is definitely a key for success here. And analyze and improve, obviously, is also something that, when you're talking about continuous testing and DevOps in general, it means that you are developing and releasing new software and innovation to the market constantly. It means that you are generating new content on a weekly basis or on a daily basis, which needs to be fully analyzed and fully visible to the decision makers. So you need to have in front of you at all time like a single pane of glass that shows you what's going on across the different teams, across the different projects, across the different pipelines or jobs that are running within your CI. And talking about what's running in CI, you need to use or leverage. We mentioned earlier, and I'm building here the story again, we mentioned earlier in this webinar the use of different personas in the team that are contributing to testing. But these teams have an option today. They have multiple options, actually, of selecting the test automation frameworks or other tools that they need for accomplishing their objectives. So you need to allow them, enable them to focus and select the right tools for the job. So when we ask these survey attendees what testing tools are they using today, we found out that it's a mix of open source tools, automation frameworks that are either commercial or built inside the organization, Some of them are also using commercial lab vendors. Perfecto also provides a lab in the cloud, as mentioned earlier. They are using commercial test reporting solutions and commercial test creation. So there are a mix of tools and labs that are out there. Some of them are free, some of them are commercial and requires license. At the end of the day, I haven't ran into, and I have been carrying almost 20 years of history with me. I haven't seen any, large organization, enterprise, and such that are using only one tool or one framework across the different teams that they have. It's actually mixing and matching the automation tools and the frameworks, the reporting tools, the labs, to what the team needs to do, to what skill set that are available within the team, and we know that the skill set vary as well as the objectives. So we didn't receive, a yes or no question here or an answer here. We received a mix of responses, which means a winning test automation strategy considers more than a single solution. And I think this wasn't a bad response. In my mind, it was actually a very good one. And when I talked about strategizing your continuous testing to be successful in DevOps, this is one of the things that I meant. Don't put yourself or block yourself in one solution within one framework. Match the frameworks. Today there are many open source solutions out there. Each serves or brings different value to your team and obviously to your quality objectives. So the mixing here is good news. So I don't need to go and drill into what are the meanings of mixing the different tools. What I do like to leave you with is in this slide is myself together with some nice folks within Perfecto and Perforce created this buyer's guides for web and mobile test automation tools. This buyer's guide, if you cannot find it online, send us either a message or an email. Contact me if you like. I will give you the access. It's a free tool. It's a free report, but it actually gives you the mixes of consideration, the mix of considerations that you need to take in order to pick the right test automation framework. Again, mostly the open source frameworks of the world, because I think that the open source frameworks of the world today are good enough. But again, you don't need to focus only on one. There are different frameworks that support and provide different values. So you need to have the right mix of these frameworks for complete and maximum test automation coverage. Perfecto in that regards, by the way, we are an open and integrated cloud solution. So we integrate with tons of open source frameworks from the web landscape as well as the mobile. Just to name a few, we have Protractor, Selenium, Appium. We also have some locked frameworks like Espresso and XUI test that we support. We have Cucumber, BDD. We integrate with CI tools, Jenkins, Azure DevOps, and many others. So again, when you pick and you do the right mix of the tools, you also need to consider the platform that everything connects and reports back into. We actually thought about the complexity of matching these tools under one single platform, and we actually provide you with this umbrella of a full continuous testing solution that integrates to everything, connects to everything, and also provides you a nice quality dashboards and visibility throughout any frameworks that you select, including the CI. This is, by the way, an example. I took the previous slide and tried to create, I don't know if that's a blueprint, but some kind of a menu for web test automation, let's say responsive web test automation strategy. So let's assume you have today a responsive website that you want to test. What I've seen across the board is, again, the matching of tools, but this is an example of how a team of developers, business testers, and test automation engineers can mix and match the tools and maximize their test automation coverage together with some other platforms that are supported. So obviously the Selenium and Appium, this is the WebDriver frameworks, this is the foundation. The SDETs will be using this framework most likely for the responsive web testing. The developers, on the other hand, will benefit either from Cypress with JavaScript or headless tools like Puppeteer. If it's mobile, they will use Espresso. For business testers, we will see mostly codeless, things like Perfecto codeless or Selenium IDE. Some will also use BDD frameworks like Catalan Studio or Perfecto Quantum, which also is a BDD solution. But this is how you see multiple personas working together on one single project towards a maximum test automation coverage. So that's just a real-life example of how you put some tools into one test automation strategy for maximum coverage. So I was a bit negative earlier. I will continue the theme of being negative in this slide as well. But again, I did provide some practical advices, some real-life examples on how you can fix some of the broken things here. And shift-left testing is obviously broken because we see today that the majority, 63% of the responders are starting to do testing after the new development, the new code is ready. Think about it. 63% of the organizations today are still, waiting for a new build, for new code to be delivered, just for them to start developing test automation, providing back feedback to developers. This is an impossible reality, and this is the opposite, the exact opposite of shifting testing left. When you shift test left, you do not wait for the build to be ready. You are already embedding testing inside the build process or the coding process. You are providing mocked environments, early builds, and early, feature implementations to your test engineers so they can start playing, they can start building the test automation foundation and not wait until the end. So here as well, the implications are quite clear. We covered them, nothing new here. But from a recommendation perspective, you want to enable testing, again, test automation engineers, business testers, and also the developers, by the way, to get access to new code earlier as much as possible. As soon as a new code commit is happening, someone from the testing responsible guys needs to be on top of it, needs to start looking into it, needs to start seeing whether there is a gap in test automation coverage, platforms, environment that needs to be set up. This is one step after the other. Otherwise, there is no way of maturing test automation. There is no way of shifting towards a daily release. Okay, start automating early in the cycle comes quite close to the previous comment here. Leverage mixed teams, we talked about it. When you have this barrier between dev and test, obviously there is lack of synchronization. Everything goes, is being delayed. Everyone needs to be on the same page. You need to have a dashboard. You need to have a visualization of the story points, the content, the scope of each build, even going forward, so teams know what they're working on, what's pending, what's the issues, what are the bottlenecks, what pending defects they need to validate, and so forth, which environments they're working on, which environments are actually outdated. This is another element here in shift left. You cannot do testing when your environment is outdated. Outdated can be platforms that weren't upgraded for a while, or the data that the test environments are using is simply not up to date. Everything, by the way, that I just mentioned, obviously needs to be maintained and managed all the time. You're not just doing it once and done with that. Iterations are happening on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. You need to continuously maintain, monitor, see what's going on, and improve. It's not something that you can do and lie back and let things fix themselves. Unfortunately, this is not the reality. It doesn't happen. Okay? Obviously, when you find these defects late, nothing new here, the price is growing. The next finding, obviously, or the next insight, that's not a finding, that's an insight that we got from this survey, where the biggest software testing challenges that you're facing is to achieve complete test automation, to have a lab platform setup and maintenance. All of these objectives, translate into one single outcome or insight. The organizations are not getting sufficient value from the test automation investments. And what I'm talking here about from an investment perspective, I mean Organizations are paying tons of money to engineers, developers, test automation engineers, and managers themselves, including purchasing licenses for test automation, frameworks, tools. Open source obviously is free, but the commercial one obviously costs money, and they're not getting enough value. They're not getting enough value because of many reasons that I mentioned earlier. Lack of synchronization between the teams, matching the skills and the frameworks that these guys are using, not having visibility into what's going on. Everything here translates into lack of value. When you are not getting value from your test automation, it means that it's not just that you are wasting money, you are actually endangering your clients from a bad user experience in the good case. In the bad scenarios, you're losing money. I can give here an example of the latest Black Friday. We heard about Costco and other big retailers that obviously were kind of mature in test automation, but not enough because they had outages that cost them $100 and even more million in just one day. So it's not just a matter of losing money on the investments in technology and test automation tools. It's also about the reputation and business outcomes that these organizations are suffering from. So the quick comment on that, because I already provided some very good, in my mind, tips and practices of building robust test automation across the teams with right visibility, with a matching of tools to objectives and skill set, the triangle of people, processes, and technology. But I think that now that we are in a new decade, and now that we are seeing the growth of more advanced AI machine learning solutions across the board, across multiple use cases, I think that we need to start thinking as organizations a bit outside of the box. And while we do want to do testing at each and every phase in the DevOps pipeline with commercial and open source tools, we also need to start looking into more smart technologies, including AI and machine learning. And there are just few, we call them approaches, but categories in AI and machine learning that can be baked into the process on top of your existing test automation techniques, but complementing them and improving what's broken for you from both a visual testing perspective, declarative testing from like model-based test automation, NLP, natural language programming, from self-healing codeless solution like Perfecto is giving, smart root cause analysis and reporting on the analytics side. Again, Perfecto is working quite hard in maturing its reporting and analytics with a lot of smart machine learning algorithms in the backend. So you get fast root cause analysis of any failures that you see in your pipeline, including in the CI. So there are many approaches that are maturing here using machine learning. Start thinking on how you can combine and mix these approaches and tools. Again, you don't need to replace and throw away any of your investments in something that works in the pipeline, but things that are blocking you, like quality visibility, escape defects, skill set that causes too much manual testing. There are approaches here that can complement and solve some of these issues for you. So again, for your considerations, what you can pick, you don't need to pick all of these, but see what's painful enough for you to start considering some advanced AI machine learning techniques to bake into the overall process. I think I mentioned earlier that, while every single individual that we spoke with when we created this report, the state of test automation, understood and, confirmed that test automation is broken. It's a painful thing for the market. Hence, in this next 6 to 12 months, these enterprises are definitely going to invest. Over 56% are still looking into that, but the remainder are obviously looking to invest in test automation tools, techniques. Some of them are going to enhance what they have already in-house. Some of them are simply going to build things from scratch, by replacing a lot of manual activities that they have today, but definitely test automation is becoming top of mind for executives, CIOs, VPs of R&D, and directors of QA. And by the way, it perfectly aligns to the DORA report from 2019, because these exact individuals, maybe not exact by name, were mentioning that this is some of their objectives going forward. They want to have 208 times more frequent code deployments, okay? They want to have at least 106 times faster lead time from commit to deployments. They want to have 7 times lower change failure rates. Everything here in this slide translates into automation processes and efficiency, okay? Fast feedback, fast resolution of issues, automated processes, automated deployments. Everything here comes together, and this is the highest priorities for these executives. So it was good that we, on our own report, as in the previous slide, found out that there is allocation of budgets towards investment in test automation, but there is also budgets that are allocated to the entire automation pipeline across the board, including development, deployments, and operations. To mature and double click on the previous slides, there are some metrics that you can carry. So from the previous, from my latest book called Continuous Testing for DevOps Professionals, in the Maturing the Path Towards Continuous Testing chapter, I outlined 27 metrics divided into 3 buckets, okay? Speed and velocity, quality, and cost. If you build this triangle of speed versus quality versus cost, you actually are putting yourself in the head of CIOs, VPs, and the budgets and decision makers in the DevOps teams. And these guys care about, and I've shown you in the previous slide, right? They want to release faster, identify issues faster to increase quality, and obviously they need to keep their budget lean and in control. These are few of the metrics that these guys can use, or you guys online as well, can use to measure your where you are on as a benchmark, where you are in the maturity curve for quality and DevOps, and B, how can you improve in areas that you are not really measuring today. Some of the organizations are not even measuring these kind of points here. So by starting to measure, you already start to improve, okay? And again, this is not to finger point, or blame anyone. This is all about continuous improvement as a team, as a DevOps organization that wants to move faster. So you don't need to pick all the 27 tips here. Just pick few from each bucket, see if it makes sense, see if it brings you relevant insights that you can improve on, and maybe then consider adding few more metrics, again, just to maximize the continuous improvement and the maturity going forward. So I think that I mentioned in the previous slides that everyone is looking to invest in test automation and maturing DevOps. They want to reduce the regression cycle time. They want to reduce the number of escape defects. They want to integrate more into the CI pipeline. It can be testing. It can be other things towards releasing apps faster. So these are the objectives or the priorities of the executives that we discussed. And it kind of aligns to, again, the DORA report that looks at the elite organization. I won't read every line from this table, but you can see that elite organizations, from a maturity standpoint, have a fully automated build. 92% of the build is automated with everything that comes inside: testing, validation, scanning, deployment, everything. Automated unit test, 87% of the elite organization are here. Okay, you need to have 87% automation of the unit test to be in the elite column. Okay, automated security testing, that's definitely something that everyone, including the elite guys, need to work on, because again, 31% is still kind of low even for mature organizations that want to eliminate security bottlenecks and vulnerabilities. Same goes, by the way, for the performance. I think that this comes into the non-functional testing, security, performance, accessibility, and stuff like that are kind of flow from a test automation coverage, and they also need to shift left and fall in the build process for faster feedback and better user experience at the end of the day. So again, if you want to see another benchmark, this is a nice example of a benchmark that aligns to the priorities of these organizations. You can also look at my previous slides from other metrics and see where you stand today and maybe where you are going to stand in the next 6 months. By the way, it's going to be interesting to see in next year survey that we are going to conduct how many of the organizations improve and in which bucket they made improvements based on some of the recommendations that I'm giving here and many others are also giving in the market. Lastly, before we are close to wrapping this webinar, I want to just touch on mobile. And this wasn't, a groundbreaking finding, but we did wanted to understand, where mobile stand within the organization, because digital transformation happened a few years ago. Everyone is almost fully digital. Everything goes through mobile, and mobile is quite critical. The only thing that is important to mention here that while mobile is important to these businesses, they need to invest much more into mobile quality, because as these organizations fully transformed into mobile, they left no other option for their users, okay? Today, most of the banks are fully digital. You go to Tangerine Bank, you go to Capital One. These are all mostly technology banks, digital banks, and they're all relying on web and mobile as the go-to channels engaging with their end users. If this mobile or web channel is down or doesn't satisfy from functionality and performance or availability, these guys have nowhere to go. The branches almost completely closed, or in some banks they don't even have a branch, so they have no other choices but either leave the bank or move to a different one. But again, there is no alternatives today. Everything, especially in the large enterprises, has become digital. So while it's important, you need to keep these platforms working successfully, innovate, keep up with the latest and greatest platforms and advancements that are happening in the market. This week or this month that we are doing this webinar, Mobile World Congress, with some new devices, Samsung S20 and other devices were launched. So keep up with all the foldables, the 5G network deployments, everything here that I'm talking about needs to be top of mind for executives, as mobile, again, is the standard channel for engaging with your customers. So just to summarize, you want to put emphasis on coverage and user experience, measure everything, performance, accessibility, usability. It needs to be part of your pipeline. Automate across different platforms and conditions, network conditions, 5G, 4G, Wi-Fi, different geolocations, different context related scenarios, like different apps running in the background, lower battery conditions. All of this needs to be automated, and you need to know what's going on for your users. Automate all the authentication methods. Today we have two-factor authentication. We have fingerprint and face recognition. All of these needs to be automated. If they are manual, most likely they will be skipped at the regression level, and you will have escape defects. Keep up with iOS 13 and Android 10, sorry. These guys are releasing constantly patches. Desktop web browsers like Firefox are releasing a GA version on a monthly basis. This browser is not just for the desktop, it's also running on a mobile. For responsive web experience, you need to have, again, the same experience on a native mobile app as well as a web app on both smartphones and tablets. So maybe all of these things seems trivial, and yeah, we know that because digital isn't new, but still, if you go to the app stores, you look at the complaints, the lower star ratings, it all comes back to lack of support for specific platforms or conditions, poor performance. I mentioned earlier in the webinar, most applications today in the release notes, minor bug fixes and performance improvements, okay? No innovation. Think about that. So to finalize this webinar, what do you need to release a top-notch digital user experience? You need to have a stable and scalable platform for both mobile and web testing. You need to be on top of your quality in order to detect defects earlier in the cycle. To do so, you need to have good automation, but you also need to have quality dashboards that can highlight and provide you with the insights that are happening in a timely manner. You need to have all the right artifacts and reports so the developers can fix faster all the defects. You need to proactively reduce risk of escape defects by building, I mentioned earlier, the AI and machine learning. You need to have full control over your environments so they are stable, and you are only focusing on the right failures, actually eliminating the noise so you do not lose trust with your developers. So the final recommendations from this webinar: enable access to new code faster within the cycle. Match test automation to the persona and skill set. It can be a mix, again, of tools, coded, codeless, and BDD. Build mixed teams, break down all the silos. Continuously monitor and have full visibility into your activities within the CI and outside the CI. And obviously, make sure that you have the right test automation coverage, both on the platforms and on your scenarios for fast feedback, lack of escape defects, and high velocity. Lastly, like in any webinar that you have heard me talk, we have these 4 pillars for continuous testing. You need to have good creation, execution, and lab, together with analysis, all under the same unified solution that gives you full control and visibility into everything. I only separated these 3 from analysis because this is where you can actually learn. Going back to the slide on the metrics, this is where you measure success. This is where you improve the quality and provide fast feedback to the developers. Without a good analysis solution, in most cases, in our cases at least, it's machine learning based. You cannot really realize value and make value out of your investment in test automation. So again, we are ending, or actually starting a new decade of test automation. We found some disturbing facts in the market. A lot of them were quite known, but I think there is an opportunity today in the market as tools, processes, and also people's skill set have evolved to take everything into better control with a strategy and aligning to the recommendations that I've just listed in this webinar and make some improvements so next year survey will look much better. In the time that we have left, Shelby, do we have any quick questions? I know that I actually went a bit over, but if you have time for a few more questions, the rest we can answer after the webinar.
Sure. Our first question is, how can I better scope my test automation coverage for mobile and web?
That's a good question. And when I talked a bit earlier on test coverage, I exactly mentioned, platforms and scenarios. So, and tying it back to the definition of continuous testing, running all the high-value test cases. So let's break down the answer into 2. You need to have the proper coverage or scoping the test coverage from a test automation scenario going into the high-value test automation cases, going into the business flows, the business or the screens in your application or websites that are the most important ones, that are mostly error-prone to issues, either on specific platforms or in all platforms, and make sure that you have full automation on these cases. Next, through analytics and other advanced techniques, you want to make sure that you are on top of the market coverage. So if you're looking at web, you want to make sure that you are at least testing on the desktop browsers that are beta, latest, and at least latest -3. So it's about 5 different browsers across the different operating systems. On the mobile, you have a bit more complicated coverage, like the latest Android and iOS, on the latest operating systems and latest -1 and 2. This is at least the minimal level of coverage. So my answer to you from a scoping perspective, combine the right high-value test cases, but make sure that you're not neglecting the platforms themselves, again, in the different network configurations or environments, as I mentioned earlier, the 5G, the app running in the background, testing like your end users are using the apps.
All right, the next question is, how can Perfecto help address some of the findings in the report, especially around test automation?
So I think I didn't demonstrate it in this webinar, but I think I did mention a few ways. So Perfecto, as a cloud solution, removes the need for setting up and maintaining a full enterprise-grade test environment for both web and mobile devices. We have 11 data centers with real devices and desktop browsers, which are enabling you access to them, running test automation at scale using the majority of open source as well as commercial frameworks, including running from CI. At the end of this, we also provide the smart reporting and analytics with machine learning algorithms for fast root cause analysis identification. When you combine these entire capabilities into one solution, I think we are able to reduce a lot of the pains that this report was showing from both coverage perspective, test automation stability and reliability, and environment setup that takes a lot of the manual time from practitioners.
Great, that's all we have time for today. If we didn't get to your question, we'll reach out to you via email. Thank you to our audience for your attendance and participation today, and thanks to our presenter, Eran. We hope to see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.